The wolf came back at dawn, and it was walking on a leg that should have been shattered. I saw it from the upper hall. I had been standing at the window with a cup of cold tea, watching the mist come off the moor the way I did most mornings when sleep would not hold me, and the gray shape that limped through the gate was one I recognized. Fenner, a border wolf, 7 years old, scarred along the left flank from a tangle with a mountain cat the previous winter. 3 days ago, a rockslide on the North Pass had caught him and 2 of my patrol wolves, and Bryn, my hunt master, had carried Fenner back across his saddle with the foreleg hanging wrong. Bryn said the bone was done, said the wolf would heal crooked at best, or not at all. Fenner walked through my gate at dawn on a leg that was splinted with birch bark and wrapped in clean linen, and he walked as straight as the day he was born. I set the cup down. By the time I reached the lower yard, Bryn was already crouched beside the wolf, turning the splinted leg in his hands with the careful bewilderment of a man examining something he cannot account for. The linen was neat. Whoever had wrapped it knew what they were doing. The strips were tight enough to hold but loose enough to let the blood move, and beneath them I could smell a poultice. Rosemary, willow bark, something else, something green and sharp that I could not name. "Who did this?" I asked. Bryn looked up at me. He had no answer. I did not think much of it that first morning. A wolf wanders. A wolf finds help. Perhaps a shepherd's wife on the far side of the ridge, or a traveling herbalist passing through. I told Bryn to note it and let the wolf rest, and I went back to the cold business of running Durnhallow, which in those days was the only business I had left. Durnhallow is a highland kingdom. Stone and wind and rain, a keep on a ridge above open moorland, birch forests to the north, and the dark line of the mountains behind them. It is not a gentle country. The wolves that run here are not gentle wolves. They are gray and broad-shouldered, and they know the cold, and they serve the alpha because the alpha has earned it, not because the alpha asked. My father built this keep. His father cleared the pass. I inherited a kingdom that does not forgive idleness, and I have run it accordingly: council at dawn, border patrol at midday, court grievances before supper, and every night the long walk along the ridge with my own wolf pacing beside me, restless, always restless, neither of us able to settle. 7 years that restlessness, 7 years since Ailey's died. She did not die in battle. She did not die dramatically, the way the ballads would have it. She caught a fever in the wet spring, and she fought it the way she fought everything, quietly, stubbornly, with her hand on mine and her jaw set, and on the 9th day she closed her eyes and did not open them again. I buried her on the ridge where the wind comes off the moor, and I went back to the keep and I sat in the chair she had sat in, and my wolf howled for 3 nights, and then he stopped howling and started pacing, and he has not stopped since. I do not talk about this. I am not a man who talks about things. I run my kingdom. I hold my borders. I keep my wolves fed and my people housed and my counsel from each other's throats, and if there is a hole in the center of my life the exact shape of a woman who died in a spring rain, I have arranged the furniture around it and I do not look at it directly. This is the man I was the morning Fenner came home healed. 2 weeks later, it happened again. A yearling named Calla, bitten in a border dispute with a rogue wolf. The wound on her shoulder had gone hot and sour, and Bryn said she would lose the use of the leg. I ordered the wound packed and left Calla in the den to heal or not. She vanished at dusk. By morning she was back, the wound clean, the infection drawn, a fresh poultice bound with strips of undyed linen. The same rosemary, the same green sharp scent I could not name. Then a third, a fourth. Over the course of the next 2 months, 7 of my wolves went missing for a night and returned tended. Always at dusk they slipped away. Always at dawn they came back, splinted, bandaged, smelling of wood smoke and herbs. The wounds were competently treated, the wrappings careful, the poultices exact. Whoever was doing this was not guessing. They knew what they were about. Bryn tried to follow them. He lost the trail every time. The wolves moved through the birch forest at a pace that said they knew exactly where they were going, and they did not want company. When Bryn pressed, they circled back and lay down in the yard as though they had never intended to leave. When he gave up and went inside, they rose and vanished again within the hour. "They're choosing to go," Bryn told me, leaning against the doorframe with his arms folded and the baffled scowl he wore when the world stopped making sense. "They're not wandering. They know the path, and they're keeping it from us." "Wolves don't keep secrets," I said. "These ones do." I brought it to Osric, my steward. Osric is a precise, narrow-faced man who keeps his ledgers in a hand so small you need good light to read it, and who believes that every problem in the kingdom can be solved by consulting the correct document. He checked the records. No traveling healers had been registered at the border in 6 months. No herbalist had petitioned for market space. No shepherd's wife on the near moor kept wolves or had been reported treating them. "It could be a hedge healer," Osric said. "Someone living rough outside the rolls. There are always a few. A hedge healer with surgical skill and a stock of fresh rosemary." Osric had no answer for that either. I let it go. I had borders to hold and a council to manage and a kingdom that needed governing, and if some unseen hand was healing my wolves, that was, on balance, better than the alternative. But I noticed things. I noticed that the wolves who came back from wherever they went were calmer afterward, steadier. Fenner, who had been snappish with the other wolves since the rock slide, stopped snapping. Calla, who had been restless and sore, settled into a quiet watchfulness that reminded me of my oldest wolves, the ones who had seen enough to know that not everything needed answering with teeth. And then, on a night in late autumn when the first frost had silvered the moor, and the wind came off the mountains with a bite that said winter was close, my own wolf came back. I need to explain something about my wolf. He is not like the border wolves or the patrol wolves. He is my spirit wolf, the beast that runs beside the alpha, bound to me since the day I came into my power, a part of me the way my heartbeat is a part of me. He is the great gray, the one the pack knows by sight, and for 7 years he has been wrong. Not injured, not sick, just wrong, pacing, circling the keep at night. Standing at the gate and staring at the tree line as though he could see something in the dark that I could not. Bryn said it was grief, that the wolf had lost its mate when I lost mine, and that he would pace until he found her or until I did, and since Ailey's was in the ground on the ridge, the pacing would not stop. I had accepted this the way I had accepted everything else, with the grim efficiency of a man who has no other option. That night I woke because the pacing had stopped. The keep was quiet. The sound I had lived with for 7 years, the soft pad of heavy paws on stone, back and forth, always moving, was gone. I went to the lower hall. He was not there. I went to the yard. He was not there. I went to the gate, and the gate was open. He came back at dawn, the way the others did, and he was different. He walked through the gate with his head carried easy and his tail low and calm, not tucked and not high, just settled, and in the thick fur of his neck there was a sprig of dried rosemary, tucked in as though someone had placed it there the way you might tuck a flower behind a child's ear. He smelled of wood smoke, of honey, of that green sharp herb I still could not name, and when he came to me in the yard and pressed his shoulder against my leg, his eyes were quiet. For the first time in 7 years, my wolf was still. He went out again the next night, and the night after that. Each time he came back calmer, more settled, with rosemary in his fur and wood smoke on his coat, and that look in his eyes that said he had found something I had not. By the 3rd morning, Bryn stood beside me in the yard and looked at the wolf and then looked at me and said, "You need to follow him." "I know. Tonight. I know." The next wounded wolf came that afternoon, a young patrol wolf named Thorn, who had twisted his hind leg in a rabbit burrow on the eastern slope. Not a serious injury, the kind of thing that would heal on its own in a week. But by dusk, Thorn was on his feet and moving north toward the birch forest with the purposeful, straight-line gait of a wolf who knew exactly where he was going. I followed him. No crown, no cloak, no chain of rank. I left the sword because a sword announces itself, and I wore the plainest coat I owned, a wool thing, patched at the elbow that I used for riding in wet weather. I told Bryn where I was going. He offered to come with me. I told him no. This felt like the kind of thing a man should do alone, though I could not have said why. The rain started before I reached the tree line. Not a hard rain, but steady and cold, the kind that settles into the wool and the leather and the space between your shoulder blades and does not leave. Thorn moved through the birch forest at a pace that assumed I would keep up, and I did, though my boots found every root and every stone that his paws avoided. The forest was dim. The last of the autumn light came through the canopy in gray streaks, and the birch bark glowed white in the dusk like the bones of something ancient standing watch. I followed the wolf for an hour. The forest thinned. The land rose, then dropped into a shallow valley where the birch gave way to hawthorn and elder, and at the bottom of the valley, set against a low stone wall with a garden behind it and a curl of smoke rising from the chimney, was a cottage. It was small. Stone walls, a turf roof, a door of weathered oak with iron hinges that looked older than the keep. The garden, even in late autumn, even under the frost, was still alive. The woody stalks of rosemary, the late sage, the dark tangles of what I now recognize as comfrey and yarrow and woundwort. Someone had built cold frames from salvaged timber and oiled cloth, and beneath them, green things grew in defiance of the season. Thorn walked to the door, lifted one paw and scratched. The door opened, and the light that came through it was warm. "There you are," said a voice. A woman's voice, low and steady, with the matter-of-fact calm of someone who had been expecting the knock. "Come in, then. Let me see the leg." Thorn went in. I stood in the rain, 20 paces from the door, and I watched through the gap she had left open. There was a fire. There was a table with clay jars and bundles of dried herbs and strips of clean linen laid out in neat rows, and there were wolves. 5 of them. 5 of my wolves lying on the stone floor around the hearth, their coats dry and warm, their breathing easy, their heads resting on their paws or on each other. Fenner was there. Calla was there. I recognized the reddish yearling and the scarred old border wolf and the small dark female who had been coughing last month and whom I had assumed was sleeping in the den. They were asleep, all of them, in the deep, trusting, boneless sleep of creatures who are exactly where they want to be. And the woman was kneeling on the floor beside Thorn, running her hands down his twisted leg with the careful, knowing touch of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She was not what I had expected. I do not know what I had expected. A wise woman with braided white hair and an air of mystery, perhaps, or a recluse wrapped in furs and speaking in riddles. She was none of those things. She was a woman of perhaps 30 summers, dark-haired, with a face that was more weather-beaten than beautiful, though her eyes, when she glanced up toward the open door and saw me standing there in the rain, were the clear gray-brown of river stones. She wore a wool dress the color of undyed linen, an apron stained green and brown with the marks of her work, and her hands were rough and herb-darkened and competent. "You're soaked," she said. She said it the way she might have said it to one of the wolves, without ceremony, without particular concern for who I was, just the plain observation that a creature was wet and should not be. "Come in. I've got the fire going." I came in. The cottage was warm in the way that a place is warm when someone has been keeping it that way for years, not the harsh blaze of a fire just lit, but the deep, banked, accumulated warmth of a home that is tended. The wolves did not stir when I entered. Fenner opened one eye, regarded me without interest and closed it again. I was not the person they had come to see. She was binding Thorn's leg. I stood by the door, dripping on her stone floor, and watched her work. She moved with an economy I recognized. The same economy my best soldiers have, the kind that comes from doing a thing so many times that the body knows the sequence, and the mind is free to think about something else entirely. She cleaned the twist with warm water, felt along the joint with both thumbs until she found the place where the tendon had pulled, pressed it back with a motion so quick and sure that Thorn barely flinched, and bound it with linen and a poultice that smelled of rosemary and that green sharp thing I could not name. "Comfrey," she said without looking up. "What?" "You've been trying to work out the green one. Every wolf who goes back to you smells of it and you can't place it. It's comfrey. Grows wild on the north slope if you know where to look." I stared at her. "The wolves talk," she said. "Not in words, but they carry things back and forth. I know your hunt master has been trying to follow them. I know your steward checked the records. And I know you've been standing at your window every dawn watching for them, because the big gray told me." "The big gray?" "Your wolf, the gray one with the white blaze on his chest. He's been coming to me for 2 months." There was a chair by the fire, a rough thing made from birch limbs and sheep's wool, and it had been placed at exactly the right angle to catch the warmth without catching the smoke. I sat down in it. I did not ask permission. Something about this woman and this cottage and these wolves made asking permission feel beside the point. "Who are you?" I said. She finished with Thorn's leg and sat back on her heels. Thorn, satisfied, limped to the hearth and folded himself down among the other wolves with the contented sigh of a creature arriving where it belonged. The woman looked at me. "My name is Marin," she said. "I live here, I grow herbs, I heal wolves. That is all there is to tell." It was not all there was to tell, but she said it with a finality that closed the door, and I let it stay closed. For now. She made tea. This sounds like a small thing, a woman in a cottage making tea, but I want to say it properly, because it was the first thing she did for me, and I have never forgotten it. She took a clay pot from the shelf and measured dried leaves into it, chamomile, I think, and something darker, and she poured water from the kettle that hung over the fire, and she set a cup beside me on the hearthstone without comment. She did not ask if I wanted it. She did not ask my name. She saw a man who was cold and wet and sitting in her chair, and she gave him tea, because that was what you did. I drank it, it was good. "The wolves," I said, "why do they come to you?" Marin sat down on the floor across from me, her back against the stone wall, her hands wrapped around her own cup. Around us, the wolves breathed and slept and made the small sounds of creatures entirely at ease. "Because I'm here," she said, "and because I don't turn them away." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got." She took a sip of her tea. "The first one came 3 years ago, a pup, half-starved, with a thorn in his front paw. He was crying at the garden wall. I pulled the thorn and fed him and let him sleep by the fire. He came back the next week with another wolf. Then another. I think she paused, choosing her words with care. I think they know, the way they know where water is or where the storms come from. They know that this is a place where they will be tended, so they come." "You're a healer." Something shifted in her face. Not pain exactly, more the careful blankness of a person stepping around a hole in the floor that they have long since learned to avoid. "I was an apprentice," she said, "once. I waited." She told me, not all at once and not in order, and not with the kind of self-pity that would have made it easier to dismiss. She told me in pieces, between sips of tea, while the fire cracked and the rain ran down the oiled parchment of the windows, and the wolves shifted and sighed around us. She had been apprenticed to Gerda. Old Gerda, the pack healer, who had served my father before me and who still kept the healing rooms in the lower keep with the iron authority of a woman who believes she has earned the right to be obeyed. Marin had come to Gerda at 14, an orphan, no family, no wolf of her own, but with a talent for plants and a steady hand and a willingness to learn that should have counted for something. It did not count for enough. Gerda was a wolf healer. Her gift was tied to the bond. She could feel what the wolves felt, could sense the break in the bone and the heat of the infection through the link that the bond provides. Marin had no wolf. She had no bond. She had only her hands and her eyes and her knowledge of which root drew poison and which bark brought down a fever, and to Gerda that was not healing. That was gardening. She told me I had no gift, Marin said. Not cruelly. She believed it. She said a healer without a wolf is a cook without a fire. The ingredients are there, but the heat is missing. She said I would never feel what the wolves felt, and without that feeling I could not truly heal. And you accepted this. I was 19. She was the pack healer. What was I going to do, argue? Marin's mouth did something that was almost a smile but was mostly the expression of a woman who has had a long time to think about what she should have said and who has decided it does not matter anymore. She dismissed me, formally. Wrote it in the record. The council struck me from the pack rolls. I was no longer apprentice, no longer healer, no longer, well, no longer anything, really. I don't think anyone meant it as cruelty. I think they simply stopped thinking about me. Where did you go? Here, she gestured at the cottage. It was abandoned. I found it on a walk 3 days after Gerda dismissed me. The roof needed mending and the garden was dead and the chimney drew badly, but it was stone walls and a door that closed and no one else wanted it. So I stayed. For 8 years. For 8 years. I looked at the wolves sleeping around her hearth. At the jars of salve and the bundles of dried herbs and the neat rows of linen bandages. At the garden outside the window, green even in frost, tended with the relentless care of someone who understood that the plants were the only thing standing between her and uselessness. You built all of this yourself, I said. The wolves helped. That almost smile again. Fenner dug most of the garden beds, though I think he was looking for rabbits. And the little dark one, I call her Wren, she carried sticks for the cold frames until I had enough. They're very practical, your wolves. They see a thing that needs doing and they do it. They are my wolves, I said, and even as I said it I knew it was only half true. They were her wolves too. They had chosen her. I should tell you about the moment my wolf came in. I had been in the cottage for perhaps an hour. The rain had slowed. Marin had refilled my cup and was sitting cross-legged on the floor, telling me about Calla's shoulder, how she had drawn the infection with a poultice of comfrey and honey, and changed the wrapping 3 times a day for a week. And I was listening with the particular attention of a man who is learning that the world contains rooms he did not know existed. The door scratched. Marin rose and opened it and my wolf walked in. He was wet from the rain, and when he shook himself, water sprayed across the hearth and the sleeping wolves in Marin's apron, and she laughed a real laugh, short and warm, and said, "You could have done that outside, you great lout." She knelt and dried his coat with a cloth, working the water out of the thick gray fur with a practiced ease that told me she had done this before. Many times. She knew the whorls of his coat. She knew the place behind his left ear where the fur grew in a stubborn ridge. She rubbed it and he leaned into her hand, and his eyes half closed. Then she tucked a sprig of rosemary into his neck fur, the same place I had found it every dawn, and said, "There. Now you smell like yourself." My wolf walked past the other wolves, past the fire, past the table with its jars and linens, and he lay down at her feet. He put his great head on his paws. He closed his eyes. He did not pace. He did not circle. He did not stand and stare at the door as though the thing he was looking for was always somewhere else. He lay down and he was still. Something happened in my chest that I do not have the right words for. It was not a blow. It was not a fire. It was not the kind of thing the old stories describe when they talk about the bond, the surge, the blaze, the roar of the wolf rising. It was quieter than that. It was like rain stopping. It was like a door that had been sealed shut for 7 years swinging open on a hinge I did not know it had. And behind it was a room that was warm and lit and waiting, and the room was her. I looked at Marin. She was still kneeling beside my wolf, her hand resting on the gray fur of his shoulder, and the firelight caught the planes of her face, the weathered skin, the strong jaw, the river-stone eyes, and I knew her. Not the way you know someone you have met. The way you know your own name, the way you know the sound of rain on stone, the way your body knows the direction of home even when your mind has forgotten it. She was mine. She had been mine before I walked through her door, before my wolves found her, before Gerda dismissed her, before she was born. The bond was not new. It had been waiting the way a coal waits under ash, the way a seed waits under frozen ground, and now it was here, and it was not dramatic or blinding or violent. It was warm. It was steady. It was the most certain thing I had ever felt. Maren looked up. Something in my face must have changed, because her hand stilled on my wolf's shoulder, and her eyes searched mine with a sharpness that said she felt it too, or felt something, some edge of it, some current she could not yet name. "You should sleep," she said. "You've been sitting in wet clothes for an hour." "I'm fine." "You're shivering." I had not noticed. She rose and pulled a blanket from a chest beside the hearth, a heavy wool thing, rough woven, the kind of blanket that says I cannot afford elegance but I can afford warmth, and she held it out to me without ceremony. I took it. Our hands touched. Hers were warm and rough and smelled of rosemary and comfrey, and when her fingers brushed mine, my wolf opened his eyes and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as finally. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair by the fire with the blanket over my shoulders and watched Maren settle the wolves for the night, checking Thorn's bandage, adjusting Calla's sleeping position so the healed shoulder did not bear weight, nudging the reddish yearling over so Fenner had room to stretch. She moved among them the way a good mother moves among children, without fuss, without drama, with the bone-deep certainty that these creatures were hers to tend, and she would tend them well. She knew them, each one. She told me their injuries, their habits, their peculiarities. Fenner was brave but vain. He liked to be the closest to the fire. Calla was careful and watchful and would not eat until every other wolf had eaten first. Thorn was young and foolish and had already torn off one bandage by chewing it, so she had started wrapping them with a bitter paste that discouraged teeth. The little dark one, Wren, was the gentlest of the lot and slept with her nose tucked under her own tail. "She does that when she's content," Maren said, pointing. "Nose under the tail. It means she feels safe." "How do you know these things?" "I watch," she said. "That's all healing is, really. Watching closely enough to see what's wrong and then doing the thing that puts it right." Gerda would say healing is the bond, the connection between the healer and the wolf. Maren was quiet for a moment. "Gerda heals through the bond," she said. "I heal through attention. The wolves don't seem to care which method I use, as long as the poultice is fresh and the fire is warm." I wanted to laugh. I almost did. It had been a long time since anything had made me want to laugh. We talked through the night. She told me about the herbs, where she found them, how she dried them, which ones worked for fever and which for infection, and which for the deep boneache that came with age. She told me about the garden, how she had rebuilt it from nothing, how the rosemary had come from a single cutting she had stolen from Gerda's window box on the day she was dismissed, which was, she said, the single act of defiance in an otherwise thoroughly obedient departure. She told me about the winters, which were hard. The snow drifted as high as the doorframe, and she survived on dried stores and the occasional rabbit the wolves brought her, which she accepted with the private amusement of a woman who understood that a wolf bringing you a rabbit is the wolf's way of saying you are pack. She did not ask who I was. She did not ask why a strange man had followed a wolf to her door in the rain, and was now sitting in her chair with a blanket over his shoulders and a cup of her tea in his hands and no inclination to leave. She had the rare and restful quality of a person who does not need to know everything in order to be comfortable, and for a man who had spent 7 years in a keep full of people who wanted things from him, answers, decisions, attention, grief, her silence was like water. When the first gray light came through the windows, I stood. My wolf rose with me. The other wolves stirred, stretched, began the slow process of preparing to leave. Maren stood at the door with her arms folded and watched them go, one by one, into the morning, and I saw in her face the expression of a woman who has done this many times. Let them go, knowing they will come back, knowing that the letting go is part of the tending. "You'll want this," she said, and handed me a small cloth pouch tied with twine. "Willow bark tea, brew it strong. Your left shoulder, you've been favoring it all night. Old injury." "A sword cut," I said, "years ago." "Willow bark for the ache, and keep it warm. Heat draws the stiffness out." She said it with the easy authority of a woman giving instructions to a wolf, and it occurred to me that she had not the faintest idea she was giving medical advice to the Alpha King of Durnhallow. I took the pouch. I walked back through the birch forest in the morning cold with my wolf beside me, steady and calm, and the bond hummed in my chest like a low, warm note that I had been trying to hear for 7 years. When I reached the keep, Bryn was waiting at the gate. He took one look at my face and said nothing. Bryn is a good man. He knows when not to ask. I went to Osric. "There is a woman living in a stone cottage at the north edge of the territory, in the valley below the birch line," I said. "Find me everything the records have on her." Osric went to his ledgers. It took him an hour. When he came back, he carried a single sheet of parchment with 5 lines written on it. "Marin," he read, "former apprentice to the pack healer Gerda. Apprenticeship terminated by Gerda's recommendation 8 years ago. Reason given, insufficient aptitude, no wolf bond. Struck from the pack rolls by council order. No family, no wolf, no standing, no further entries." 5 lines, 8 years of a woman's life, reduced to 5 lines in a ledger. No one had checked on her. No one had asked where she went. No one had noticed that she was gone because she had never been important enough to notice. "That's all," I said. "That's all." Osric paused. "She was not considered relevant to any ongoing matter." I dismissed him. I sat in my chair, the chair that should have been hers, if the world made any sense, and I looked at the pouch of willow bark tea she had given me, and I thought about a woman who had been dismissed and forgotten, and who had spent 3 years quietly healing the wolves of a kingdom that did not know she existed. I went back that night. I did not plan to. I had council business and border reports and a grievance from the eastern farmers about water rights, and I attended to all of it with the diligence of a man who knows his duty and does not shirk it. But at dusk, when the light went gray and the wind came off the moor with the smell of cold rain, I found myself walking north through the birch forest with my wolf beside me. Marin opened the door before I knocked. She did not seem surprised. She did not seem pleased exactly, either, more the measured acceptance of a woman who has learned to take what comes and not read too much into it. "You again," she said. "Me again. Tea. Please." We sat by the fire. The wolves were already there, Fenner and Calla and Wren, and 2 others I hadn't seen before. Marin was grinding comfrey root with a mortar and pestle, and the rhythm of it, the steady circular grind, the pause to add a drop of oil, the grind again, was hypnotic in the way that any practiced skill is hypnotic when performed by someone who has given their life to it. "I brought you something," I said, and set a parcel on the table. Clean linen, a full bolt of it. She had been tearing her bandages from old bedsheets. She looked at the linen, she looked at me. "You noticed," she said. "I noticed things." That almost smile, apparently. I went back the next night, and the next, and the next. I went back every night for 2 weeks, and each night I stayed a little longer, and each night the bond in my chest grew warmer and steadier and more certain, and each night my wolf lay at her feet and was still, and each night Marin made tea and talked about the wolves and the herbs and the garden and the weather and the things she had read in the old healing texts she had taken with her when Gerda dismissed her. And I listened the way a man listens to music when he has been living in a silent house for 7 years. I brought her things. Not grand things. I was not wearing my crown, and she did not know who I was, and I was not trying to impress her. I brought her the things she needed: linen for bandages, a better knife for cutting herbs, beeswax for the salve she made for cracked paws, a length of rope for the cold frames, a sack of oats because she was feeding herself on herbs and rabbits and not enough of either, and her collarbones were too sharp and I did not like it. She accepted all of it with the pragmatic gratitude of a woman who understood that refusing help was not the same as strength. She did not gush. She did not weep. She said, "This is good rope, and the knife is well balanced." And once when I brought a jar of honey, she said, "I have been trying to get honey for a year and the bees keep winning." And I laughed, actually laughed, out loud, for the first time in longer than I could remember. We did not talk about the bond. She felt it, I was certain of that. There were moments when our hands met over a wolf's bandage, or when I passed her a cup of tea and her eyes held mine a heartbeat too long, and I could see the question in them. What is this? What is happening? But she did not ask it, and I did not answer it, because I was a coward in the way that men are cowards when the thing they fear is not danger but hope. And then she found out who I was. It was Bryn's doing. Not intentionally. Bryn had been following me because Bryn is my hunt master and following things is what he does. And he is also the kind of man who worries about his alpha walking alone into the woods every night with no weapon and no guard. He tracked me to the cottage. He did not come inside. But the next morning, a border patrol passed through the valley, and one of the younger wolves saw Bryn's trail and followed it, and found the cottage, and saw me through the window sitting by the fire with a woman they did not recognize. And by midday, the whole keep knew that the Alpha King had been visiting a woman in the North Valley every night for 2 weeks. Marin heard about it the way people who live at the edge of things hear about things, through the wolves. One of the patrol wolves had been to her before, and it came to her that afternoon with the news written on its body the way wolves carry news, in the stiffness of its gait, in the way it looked at her and then looked north toward the keep, in the anxious circling it did before settling by her fire. She understood. Wolves do not lie. When I came that evening, the door was closed. I knocked. I heard movement inside. The wolves were there. I could hear Fenner's breathing and Wren's soft whine, but Marin did not open the door. Marin. A silence. Marin opened the door. "I know who you are." Her voice came from just the other side of the oak, and it was steady, but I could hear the thing beneath the steadiness, not fear exactly, but the careful, controlled alarm of a woman who has realized she has been treating the most powerful man in the kingdom like an ordinary person for 2 weeks, and who has no idea what to do with that information. "You've known who I am since the first night," I said. "You just didn't know my title." "Your title changes everything." "My title changes nothing. You are the Alpha King of Durnhallow. I am a woman who was dismissed by your own pack healer and struck from your own roles. I have no wolf. I have no standing. I have no family name. I am nobody. You are not nobody. According to your steward's ledger, I am 5 lines and a note that says no further entries. According to your council, I do not exist. According to your healer, I have no gift. These are facts. Your title does not change them." I leaned my forehead against the door. On the other side, I could hear her breathing. On my side, my wolf sat in the rain and looked at me with the patient, faintly exasperated expression of a creature who could not understand what was taking so long. "Let me in," I said, "not as the Alpha King. As the man who has been sitting in your chair and drinking your tea and bringing you rope for your cold frames. Let me in as that." A long silence. The door opened. She had been crying. She had tried to hide it, scrubbed her face, straightened her apron, but her eyes were red and her hands were not quite steady, and when my wolf pushed past her and went to the hearth and lay down in his usual place, she looked at the wolf and then at me and said, "He doesn't care who you are. He just wants the fire." "He wants you," I said. "He has wanted you since the first night. That is why he is calm. That is why he stopped pacing. He found you, and everything in him that had been wrong for 7 years went quiet, and he is trying to tell me what I already know but am too stubborn to say." She stared at me. "You are my mate," I said. "The bond is here. It has been here since I walked through your door. I did not come looking for it. I came looking for the person who was healing my wolves, and I found you. And my wolf knew before I did. And every wolf in this kingdom has been trying to show me what Gerda missed, and what my counsel cannot see, and what 5 lines in a ledger do not begin to contain. Maren sat down. She sat down on the floor beside my wolf, and Fenner pressed against her on one side and Wren pressed against her on the other, and she put her hand on my wolf's gray head, and she was quiet for a very long time. I am a woman with no wolf and herb stains on her hands, she said at last. Your council will not accept this. My council will accept what I tell them to accept. Your healer dismissed me. My healer was wrong. Your pack does not know I exist. My pack is about to. She looked up at me. Her eyes were clear now, the crying was done, and what replaced it was not hope exactly, but the first faint opening toward hope, the way a door cracks before it swings wide. I am not a Luna, she said. I don't know how to be a Luna. I know how to grow rosemary and bind broken legs and make tea and talk to wolves. That is all I know how to do. That, I said, is more than enough. In the days that followed, the keep learned what I already knew. My wolves would not stop going to her, not just the wounded ones now, all of them. Every dusk, wolves slipped through the gate and headed north. Border wolves, patrol wolves, den mothers, the yearlings, the old ones. They went to Maren's cottage, and they came back at dawn smelling of rosemary and wood smoke, and the pack that served me began to divide its loyalty between the keep and a stone cottage at the edge of the world, and there was nothing I could do about it and nothing I wanted to do about it. Osric noticed. Of course Osric noticed. Osric notices when a candle burns a 1/4 inch shorter than it should. The wolves are unsettled, he said, standing in my study with his ledger under his arm and the careful expression of a man about to say something his king will not enjoy. They are leaving their posts. The border patrols are running short. If this continues, the eastern holdings will be exposed. The wolves are not unsettled, I said. The wolves know exactly what they are doing. My lord, there is a woman they are going to. She has been healing them for 3 years. She is the reason Fenner walks. She is the reason Calla's shoulder healed clean. She is the reason my own wolf has slept soundly for the first time since Ailey's died. And if the wolves choose to go to her, I am not inclined to stop them, because the wolves are choosing better than any of us have. Osric opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The council, he said carefully, would prefer a more formal explanation. The council will have one. I brought it before them the following morning. The full council, Osric, Bryn, old Gerda, Lord Hale from the eastern pass, Lady Saren of the western ridge, and the 6 elders who had served my father. I stood at the head of the table and told them what I had found. A woman named Maren, living in a stone cottage at the north edge of the territory, who had been healing the kingdom's wolves for 3 years without recognition, without payment, and without anyone in this hall knowing her name. Gerda's face went very still. She knew the name. I watched her know it, watched the careful, rigid composure of a woman who has spent 8 years not thinking about a decision, and who has just been forced to think about it. The healer's apprentice, she said, the one I dismissed. The one you dismissed for having no gift, I said. Yes. Lord Hale leaned back in his chair. He was a practical man, Hale, good with borders, good with cattle, not given to sentiment. And you propose what, my lord? A stipend, a formal recognition. I propose to bring her to the keep. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room full of people who have just heard something they need a moment to absorb. Osric spoke first. She has no wolf, no standing, no family name. She was struck from the rolls. She healed more wolves in 3 years than Gerda has healed in 10. Gerda's jaw tightened. Healing is not a matter of numbers, my lord. It is a matter of the bond, the connection between healer and wolf. She did not have it. My wolves disagree. Lady Saren stirred. Saren was a composed woman, silver-haired, well-spoken, the kind of woman the council had been quietly presenting to me for years as a suitable match, and she had borne this with the dignified patience of someone who understood the game without particularly wanting to play it. She looked at me now with an expression I could not quite read. "You speak of her," Saren said, "as though she is more than a healer." "She is." Another silence. "She is my mate," I said. "The bond is confirmed. My wolf has been at peace for the first time in 7 years because of her. I am bringing her to this keep, and I am naming her before the court, and the fact that she has no wolf and no family name, and was struck from roles that should never have been struck changes nothing about what she is." The council erupted. Not violently, Durnhallow does not do violence in its councils, but with the urgent, overlapping speech of people who have opinions, and believe those opinions must be heard immediately. Lord Hale said it was irregular. Osric said the precedent was unclear. One of the elders said the pack would not accept a Luna without a wolf. Gerda said nothing. Gerda sat very still and looked at her hands. I let them talk. I let them spend their objections like coins on a table, and when the table was covered and the purse was empty, I said, "I will bring her tomorrow, and the wolves will do the rest." I went a Marin that evening. She was in the garden, pulling the last of the sage before the first hard frost, and when she saw me at the wall, she straightened and wiped her hands on her apron and looked at me with the expression of a woman who already knew what I was going to say. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow," she repeated, not a question, an acceptance. "You don't have to change anything. You don't have to dress differently or speak differently or be anyone other than who you are. I'm not asking you to perform for the court. I am asking you to stand in my hall as yourself and let the wolves say what I have been trying to say." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at my wolf, who was lying by the garden wall with his chin on his paws and his eyes on her, the way they always were. "Will you promise me something?" she said. "Name it." "If the court refuses me, if Gerda speaks against me and the council overrules you and the pack decides I am not worthy, you let me come back here, to this cottage, to this garden. You let me keep healing the wolves, even if I am not your Luna, because the wolves were mine before you were, and I will not give them up." Something cracked in my chest. Not the bond was steady and warm and sure. Something else, something older. The last wall I had built around the part of me that knew how to love, and I had not even felt it break until it was gone. "No one," I said, "is going to take the wolves from you, and no one is going to take you from the wolves. I will promise you that, and I will keep it, and if the whole court stands against it, I will stand against the court." She nodded. Once. The sage went back in the basket, and she went inside, and I heard the door close behind her, and my wolf pressed his nose against my hand, and we walked back through the birch forest in the last of the light. They came in the morning. The whole court, the full council, the household staff, the elders assembled in the great hall of Durnhallow, which is a stone room built for function and not for beauty, with a fire at each end and a long table down the center and windows high enough to let in the light without letting in the wind. I had told them to gather. I had not told them why. Bryn, who knew, stood by the door with his arms folded and said nothing. Marin walked in. She had not dressed differently. She wore the same wool dress, the same apron, the same scuffed boots. Her hair was braided back, and her hands were clean but still stained with herbs, the green-brown marks of comfrey and rosemary that no amount of scrubbing would remove, because they were not dirt but evidence of 3 years of quiet, thankless, daily work. The court looked at her. I could see the assessment in their eyes, the way people who live inside a hierarchy scan a stranger for rank the way they scan the sky for weather. No insignia, no jewels, no wolf, no family colors. A woman in a worn dress with herb-stained hands, standing in the great hall of Durnhallow as though she had walked in from a kitchen, and in a sense she had. Gerda's face did not change. Gerda's face had not changed since yesterday. It remained in the careful, rigid blankness of a woman holding something shut. Lady Saren looked at Marin, looked at me, looked at Marin again. And then, and this is the thing I will remember about Saren for as long as I live, she gave a small, quiet nod, as though confirming something she had already decided. Lord Hale said, "My lord, is this the woman?" "This is Marin," I said, "and before any of you speak I want you to wait." "Wait for what?" "Listen," I said. They listened. For a moment there was nothing to hear: the crack of the fires, the wind against the high windows, the breathing of 60 people in a stone room. Then Bryn heard it, because Bryn always heard it first. Then Osric. Then Gerda. Then all of them. Footsteps, not human footsteps. The soft, heavy, padding rhythm of wolves, many wolves coming fast. The doors of the great hall were oak and iron, and they were closed. And the first wolf hit them at full stride, and they swung inward on their hinges with a bang that silenced the room. They poured in. Not the 5 or 6 who slept at Marin's hearth. Not the border wolves or the patrol wolves or the wounded ones who had found their way to her cottage over the past 3 years. All of them. Every wolf in Durnhallow. 20, 30. I stopped counting at 40 because they were still coming: gray wolves and dark wolves, and the big tawny ones from the eastern ridge, the old scarred fighters and the yearlings and the mothers with half-grown pups at their heels. They filled the hall. They flowed between the legs of the stunned courtiers like water between stones, and they did not look at me, and they did not look at the council, and they did not look at Gerda or Saren or Hale or Osric. They went to Marin. They surrounded her. They pressed against her legs, her hands, her hips. They sat at her feet. They lay down around her in circles, the way wolves do when they are guarding something precious. The big tawny ones flanked her. The mothers brought their pups and set them at her boots. Fenner pushed through to her right side and sat tall, his heeled legs straight and strong. Calla took her left. Wren, the little dark one, pressed her nose under Marin's hand and held it there. And then my wolf, the great gray, the spirit wolf who had paced for 7 years, who had howled for 3 nights when Ailey's died and then gone silent, who had not been still until the night he walked through a stranger's door and found the scent of rosemary and comfrey, and the hands that knew exactly where the stubborn ridge of fur behind his ear needed rubbing. My wolf walked through the court, past the council, past Gerda, past Saren, past Lord Hale and the elders, and he lay down at Marin's feet. He put his head on his paws. He closed his eyes. And the bond that had been humming in my chest for weeks, warm and steady and sure, flared open like a door thrown wide, and the warmth of it filled the hall the way a fire fills a cold room, not with drama but with the simple, undeniable fact of heat. The hall was silent. I walked to Marin. She was standing very straight, her hand on Wren's head, her eyes bright, and around her the wolves breathed and pressed and waited with the infinite patience of creatures who had made their choice long before any of us had. "This woman," I said, and my voice carried to every corner of the hall because it was the voice of the Alpha, and the hall was built for it, has been healing the wolves of this kingdom for 3 years. Every wounded wolf that vanished at dusk and came home at dawn, she was the one who tended them. Every splint, every bandage, every poultice of rosemary and comfrey and willow bark her hands. She was dismissed from this hall 8 years ago for having no gift. She was struck from the rolls. She was forgotten. And she went to the edge of our territory, and she built a garden and a fire, and she healed everything that came to her door, and she asked for nothing in return. I looked at Gerda. Gerda looked at the wolves, at the dozen wolves she had treated over the years, wolves she knew by name, wolves who were now sitting at the feet of the woman she had called ungifted. "She is my mate," I said. "The bond is confirmed, and my wolf, who has not known peace in 7 years, is at peace because of her. She has no wolf of her own, and the council's records say she has no standing, and the healer of this kingdom said she had no gift. But every wolf in Durnhallow is in this room, and they are not standing with the council." I turned to Marin. She looked at me with those river-stone eyes, and I could see the tears she was holding back, and I could see the strength it took to hold them, and I could see, beneath both, the first real, unburdened warmth I had ever seen on her face, the expression of a woman who is being seen, fully and finally, after a very long time in the cold. I took her hand, her herb-stained, work-roughened, comfrey and rosemary hand. I held it in mine, and my wolf opened his eyes and looked at us both, and the bond sang between us, not loudly, not with fireworks or blinding light, but with the steady, warm hum of a thing that had always been true and was only now being spoken aloud. "This is Marin," I said, to the court and the council and the wolves and the woman who was looking at me with the beginning of a smile. "This is the woman my wolves chose before I had the sense to. She is my Luna, and if any voice in this hall questions her worth, I would ask them to explain it to the 40 wolves who are sitting at her feet." No voice spoke. Goethe stood. She stood slowly, the way old women stand with effort, with the accumulated weight of years and decisions, and the knowledge that some of those decisions were wrong. She looked at Marin across the hall, across the wolves, across the 8 years since she had written insufficient aptitude in a ledger, and turned a woman out of the only home she had. Then Goethe bowed. It was not a deep bow. It was not a dramatic bow. It was the small, stiff, painful bow of a woman who is not accustomed to being wrong and who is doing it anyway because the evidence is lying at her feet in gray and tawny fur. She bowed and she said, "I did not see what they saw. I am sorry for it." Marin looked at Goethe for a long moment. Then she said, "I kept the rosemary cutting." Something broke open in Goethe's rigid face. "I know you did," she said. "I could smell it on the wolves." Lady Saren stepped forward. She was composed, as always, silver-haired, straight-backed, every inch the kind of woman the court had expected me to choose. She looked at Marin, and she looked at the wolves, and she looked at my hand holding Marin's, and she said, "The wolves are wiser than the council. They usually are." Then she inclined her head, a nod of concession given with the kind of grace that costs something and is worth everything, and she stepped back. Lord Hale cleared his throat. "The precedent," he began, and then stopped, because Fenner had turned his head and was looking at Hale with the flat, patient stare of a wolf who has no interest in precedent, and Hale, who was a practical man, recognized the look and said, "Well, I suppose precedent can be updated." The hall breathed. Marin looked at me. "You could have warned me about the wolves," she said. "I didn't know they were coming." "You didn't. They decided on their own. I told them nothing." She looked down at the wolves surrounding her, her wolves, my wolves, the kingdom's wolves, who had chosen her before the bond, before the naming, before any of us understood what they already knew. Wren had her nose tucked under her tail. "She feels safe," Marin said softly. "She should," I said. "She's home." That was the beginning. The days that followed were not smooth. Nothing in Durnhallow is smooth. The land won't allow it, and the people take after the land. Marin moved into the keep, and she brought her herbs and her salves and her clay jars of poultice. And Goethe, in the awkward and determined way of a woman trying to undo a wrong she cannot fully name, cleared half the healing rooms and said, "Use what you need." Marin used what she needed and did not use what she didn't. And within a week she had reorganized the herb stores with a system that made Goethe's look like guesswork. And Goethe, watching, said nothing except, "The comfrey should be higher, where the air circulates," which was the first piece of advice she had given Marin in 8 years, and which Marin accepted with a nod and a silence that said more than thanks. The council came around. They did not come around quickly or gracefully, councils never do, but they came around the way water comes around a stone, slowly, inevitably, because the alternative is to stand still while the world moves. Lord Hale drafted a formal amendment to the succession records. Osric updated the ledger. Where it had once read Marin, no further entries, it now read Marin, Luna of Durnhallow, and Osric, who prides himself on his penmanship, wrote it in the largest hand I have ever seen him use. But I will tell you the thing I remember most, because it is the thing that matters. She kept the cottage. I told her she did not have to. The keep was hers, every hall and hearth and stone of it, every room, every window that looked out over the moor where the wind comes in cold and goes out colder. She was Luna. She could have anything. She smiled, not the almost smile, but the real one, the one that reached her eyes and lived there, and she said, "The wolves might not know where to find me otherwise." So the cottage stays. The garden still grows, rosemary and comfrey and sage and yarrow, green even in the frost, tended now by Marin and by 2 young apprentices she has taken on, both of them wolfless, both of them gifted with hands and eyes and the kind of attention that Gerda once called insufficient, and that Marin calls the whole of healing. The fire is lit every evening. The cold frames that the wolves helped build still stand. And some nights when the court is quiet and the council has gone and the ledgers are closed and the borders are held, I walk the old path through the birch trees. My wolf walks beside me, easy and steady, his pacing years behind him. We come down into the valley and the smoke is rising from the chimney, and the light through the window is warm, and I knock on the weathered oak door and Marin opens it and says, "You again," and I say, "Me again," and the wolves lift their heads and settle back down and my wolf lies at her feet and she hands me a cup of tea. The herb stains never did come off her hands. I am glad of it. They are the record that no ledger kept 3 years of healing, of quiet good done without witness, of a woman the world forgot and the wolves remembered. I was the last wolf to find her door, but I knew the way home.